Welcome to Harvard, YouTube Masterclass, Coursera. We're also teaching at USC, who is the founder of it all, where I'm the chairholder of the D.W. Griffith Chair, which is just now assuming its chairdom, but holds a vault of everything D.W. Griffith, which I have all of it actually on other files that are related to my YouTube site that you can go and check out. And there's like these endless doors to more and more Griffith movies if you're really into that. And I had to see them all before I was the chair, of course, and I had to see a couple of them. The Love Flower and The Fallen Idol, I had always mixed up the two endings of, but there are some scenes about those movies you can't mix up. This is The Wizard of Oz. We're talking about this today. And by the way, I hope the midterm reminded you that really the best way to pass this class is to see all the movies. That there would be a Coursera drawn up final. I will give the web address to the final, and you can turn it in at your liking to gain the credit to the course. But you still have to, the funds have to come in through Coursera. But if you're in search of funds to go to Coursera for real, there is an option of referencing thegoldenkey.org, which you could reference me or some others, but it doesn't matter because this is a weird tale of my own concerning this film. First of all, in an archive below USC, there was this reel of film for this movie called The Patchwork Girl of Oz, and it had just been shipped in from this guy that was 99 and passed his collection on to Herb Farmer. And somehow I didn't like it broke from the film rack, and we had to like jam it up and fix it real quick, but I couldn't see that a tiny portion of it chipped off and landed in my book or something like a bookmark. And I was just like, if I use this last footage of The Patchwork Girl of Oz, that I might be responsible for that movie disappearing completely. Because see, in the silent era, Frank Baum, the author of Wizard of Oz, was already an author, and they had already made all these Wizard of Oz movies. That there is still a Patchwork Girl of Oz, I found out later, and was very pleased that that was not the last reel of it. But I thought it was the only reel because I'd never heard of it until I worked for an archive. You know, you're like, oh, there's silent versions even on these special editions. This is my favorite special edition because it's what Hollywood's all about, the Yellow Brick Road, and the fact that Elton John did that in the cover. I mean, it's been so pop culturally donated to and taken from that for MGM to already have these elements in it, like the red shoes for the red shoes. I mean, obviously, this was a couple of years before. They really don't relate to each other except they're all around musicals, and that Frank Baum's characters are brought to life is true in a more advanced way that involves men and women is true. The mythologies, the folklore is everything that bases narrative cinema from beginning to end, following the map to the treasure of gold like you're playing a game and collecting players along the way. That the stories are as endless as the side turns are endless, and that you're lost in everywhere from Munchkin Land all the way to Oz and a poppy field, etc. That you have to go fight the threshold guard and the witch to get the elixir, and I'm saying it's going to be a cruel battle all the way through the evil cave castle. But I think more can be said about this book in the BFI Classic by Salman Rushdie, and that I have smoked many bowls with Salman Rushdie at the Telluride Film Festival that we're not really sure if anyone else deserved the Pulitzer Prize so much as he when he got it, which was a little of my own to do with the publishing corporation there, because I was like, well, Salman Rushdie won't be with us much longer, and if I keep trying to write Wizard of Oz reviews as good as him, I won't either. No, I'm kidding. Ha, he's a fan, dude. He's a fan. Look at this, man. This is the Emerald City on the back of the cover. And you see the Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow, Dorothy in the middle. And this is a picture of all the cast. Now, I could go through the cast name, but this is Hollywood Classical Cinema, 1939. Remember, 1935 is when the first Technicolor came in. The first Technicolor came in when everything was clear in 3-strip color, red, blue, and yellow and green. 3 strips, actually, but there was a sound code that was embedded on the side of the film track, and a lot of the films they sent out by the time of The Wizard of Oz was fully colored. That it was widescreen, very little few should realize that this actually was in square classical aspect ratio, 1:1, or 1:1.11, because it was barely more than a square, that the width 1.1 by height 1.1 units was more than a square even by this time. And by the time of Gone with the Wind, which had in fact used several cameras side to side, but had to basically film it down into one square camera. And I'm not saying the square mode is bad or worse or anything, because, like, again, we have Napoleon, Abel Gance, 1927 silent era. He's already projecting onto these big 3-screen projectors like Cinerama. So you got to realize they preferred this mode for a theatrical angle, but also so it looked like moving photographs. And I was just telling my friend, my cousin, about the moving photographs, of how we remember that photographs don't seem as cool as film sometimes, because film is 24 photographs in 1 second, and they're each different, because if they were the same and they were moving, it'd just be called filming a photograph, which does have a certain effect that we'll see even in David Lynch's films of what filming a photograph does. But 24 frames, they're barely moving, so it gives us the suggestion that it's moving, and then makes us almost desire to see more movement, changing up from what the original movement was, though we could stare at that forever. That's hypnosis. But when you watch each one move in succession, then suddenly it's telling us a story that has a conflict resolve, you're thinking that's superior to a picture. But if I told you that those are all the same elements you're looking for in a picture, or the freaking conflict resolves, the way it was taken snap in the middle of all these what seeming like interconnected movements, really could just be us staring at a cinema screen, a TV screen. And I've seen photos, one picture, better than any movie, but I've seen some movies that have outdosed some pictures by about 1,000. And we're going to talk about one of those next. But we got to wrap up on Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz is absolutely one of those pictures. Now, I will say this, since the Rushdie book is better, we will talk about classical Hollywood cinema real quick. And this won't even be the discussion of the international mode of representation, or the standard mode of representation by Noel Birch, which is the fact that all the cuts that linger together are based on movement, match, eye movement, and everything else, and body movement, and dancing, and all the ways that music can be edited to the rhythm of a music to perpetuate the movement that's being edited together during each rise and fall of the music score. That's what Wizard of Oz does. There's leitmotifs, there's repetitious motifs, there's, it's the ring cycle yet again, told again, Nibelungen style. Here she is, she's like Aristophanes, she's coming after it. And they put her up to a lot of, like, everybody relies on Dorothy. She's kind of this innocent young Judy Garland. And it's like, if she wouldn't have gotten the movie, I wonder if she'd have gone on to all the great things that she did, even all that jazz. But really, if she was only in this movie, we'd still probably remember her as one of the greatest actresses of all time. I mean, and that they used to show this movie on TV constantly is to the total, like, thanks of TV for showing this. And I can't wait to see it again. And it's one movie I can talk about and see again. And it looks beautiful, is beautiful inside and out. The fact is, is I have this theory that Dorothy lands on a witch when she crashes her house, right? Well, she doesn't land on her. The tornado drops her and it lands on the witch. So she kills a witch. So now Dorothy's a witch killer. We all agree that Dorothy's a witch killer? Because then the good witch of the north says, Dorothy, you gotta kill another witch later in the film. So now she's already landed on one witch, and now she's got to go kill. But that is the north and the south destroying the witch of the east and the west. Doesn't really have one of those Civil War epic mythologies like it would seem. No, it's actually a witch battle between the white witches and the dark witches, and the dark witches in this good fairy tale are killed by the white witches, and the white witches only take them out because they developed a battle, which is later foreseen in the Great the Powerful Oz, which came out in 2000, later in between the year 2003 and 2012 or something around there. Anyways, I don't have my dates exactly accurate on the Great and Powerful Oz, but it was the Sam Raimi film Disney produced with James Franco, and I just got to say that's a great movie, and whoever got the real tone and majesty of the music, good job, and the way they made the movie seamlessly part of this one, which was made 70 years earlier. It's amazing what Hollywood can do with the dreams of Oz and how we can still go back to Oz, and we love going to Oz, and we thank you to especially Victor Fleming, because he was making Gone with the Wind, which we will talk about in a later episode, but he was making Gone with the Wind at the same time as he was referencing The Wizard of Oz and making that one too. So he was directing like 2 or 3 movies that year, which all directors were. His were the most ambitious. With a kids movie like Wizard of Oz that they put so much into it. We thank you, MGM. 1939 best grossing movie of the year was Stagecoach and Gone with the Wind, pretty close. But now we come to the fantasy film that started it all. And if you can see on there, this is a hologram. And it goes different ways with those rays of light looking like they're changing patterns. You see what I mean? You can make it look like it's the robot from Metropolis just by waving this cover around. This is a Blu-ray of the Kino version of the complete Metropolis. And by complete, that means it has all the minutes, 148 minutes. Hell, I heard this film was like 180 minutes when it came out. Why is it that UFA, this German studio that's making silent films, is the biggest studio of all, and they're all a good oligarchy, all an oligopolis, and then suddenly all the footage from all their films ends up missing, not even because of the Third Reich, but because of just some reason that I want to know. Why in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or do they still keep finding minutes of Metropolis that they haven't put in? And I'm glad they do. I'm glad they do find weird archives full of this stuff. Sometimes the internet, even an AI bot, will kick up a silent film nobody's seen for a while, and they're like, somebody deleted this on accident, take it now or it'll explode. And you're like, oh, it's a silent film. I'm going to give this back to the Library of Congress where it belongs. With this one, I've seen different versions, even with footage that wasn't added to this version, so that it's the complete Metropolis by means that I've seen other versions of it, by fortune or luck, that I've seen other versions of it that have other parts of it in it, and that it's still as good as the anime version that comes after it that totally remade it. And that Francis Ford Coppola will never finish his remake of it, just as like some kind of a tax shelter for his wine business. We're in. Here's Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Now you gotta know that this film is the one where everybody remembers the giant march to the Moloch pit, that they're in the middle of work, they're flicking these switches left and right, they're going into business with a bunch of ant colony looking dudes droning in, they're going out of business with a bunch of ant colony drones droning out. That you barely see the faces of the adults that are working here at first is no question too. We're watching who are the forgotten class, the social class. That it is more like The Tempest, Forbidden Planet, which is a sci-fi movie we'll talk about later, is interesting. But that the story definitely has to do with the city dwellers up in the upper world in the pleasure garden who run the whole city and run the electricity, whereas everyone else is a worker drone that has to feed the time clock with their industry over and over motion, which really, I mean, what if you signed up for a job as like an engineer on one of those things? I don't know if there aren't people that wouldn't want a job like that, dude. I knew my uncle was like, man, that looks like an easy job, when he's watching Metropolis. But it wasn't an easy job. Jokes aside, these guys are underground. They're working hard, and we're not sure if it's supposed to be social commentary. But if it is, it's really good at it, because it's basically saying the 1% that lives on top is controlling the 99% on bottom, and they're all doing all the work for those on top, and that's just how it is. But when this female breaks away from the pleasure garden, and her name is Maria, and she travels to the lower depths of the echelons of where all the soldiers and men meet that are made to work the society for the pleasure gardeners where she came. She tells them that maybe it's time that they get better lodgings, better food, better money for all the work they do. Well, at the same time, there's all these pledges, coincidentally, going through the pleasure garden, that there's going to be a revolt among the slave workers, and we've got to put a stop to it. Of course, that comes out at about the same time that they're about to revolt, and it looks like everyone stirred each other up until we realize that Maria and this Frieder, the son of this big megalomaniac that pretty much runs the city, runs the electricity for the city, and we know it's him getting effed with later, because we're seeing like lights disappear and lights reappear on his forehead, and he's like, my son, what has he done? I'm not trying to be negative to the Germans or anything. But when Frieder really tries to take the job of someone that's working in the slavery Moloch pit area, or when Frieder's running and he wants to set everyone free just by being an athlete, and that this says here on the back, even one of the most celebrated movies in cinema history, for the first time Lang's vision, which was Fritz Lang, Germany, 1928, which has influenced contemporary films like Blade Runner and Star Wars, seems complete. Now, that the robot you see here looks exactly like 3CPO is no accident, C3PO. And then that there's How They Kept My Brain Alive footage somewhere in this that's been hyped up. That there's a big, if you look at this scene where you see the robot, but in the actual movie there's a huge pagan Satan star above her, and it was more of that whole referencing of the early cinema being the dawn of the occult cinema, really, which they were saying that this was like almost a golem robot, this doppelganger somnambulist that they could carry on the hypnotic binging of if they automatoned it right, and it would be like this sort of puppet that did their bidding, and then they could get it to cause more revolts. Well, right then the city explodes. Almost all the little kids from all the city get flooded, and then the good guys save the day, and everybody signs a union and worker contract, and the strike is over, and we all get back to work. And this is when the strike resumes right afterward. This is Battleship Potemkin. And if you don't know this one, I'm not going to scare you with much of it and talk too much about the communist side of it, because the only communist I really like in cinema to express his communism in a nice, but yet totally insatiably evil way is Pasolini. Now, when Eisenstein does it, he's always biting the hand that feed him intentionally to show us that one form of communism deserves another, right? But one thing we have to remember about Eisenstein is that he also unfolds the institutional mold of representation as much as Griffith does, because he shows us the symptoms against which montage is built. Like, for instance, an episodic montage. There's one in Battleship Potemkin, an episodic montage, where it shows all the film itself as one big repeat of 3 different episodes. A ship coming into harbor after being a long way off and trapped with no food, coming into harbor, running right away. Before they get there, there's a big gun battle, and then next thing you know, these guys are back out in harbor shooting, and you never see them sign the peace treaty, but it's said in the film they are, and all that really is a propaganda film, is episodic in its montage of these 4 or 5 sequenced events. But each sequence does everything from editing to match on action and match on eyelinear, like the classic. This is a formal operation of editing. We're drawing attention to the way the editing is. Now, with the coolest shot of effect, if you put a single photo, like I said, a really good photo of someone, a person, doesn't matter who, doesn't matter, any kind of social consideration, doesn't matter, and you put a piece of bread in the second photo, or at least a moving photo of a person for a couple of seconds and a moving photo of a bread for a couple of seconds, you might think the person is somehow associated with the picture that came after it. And now I did get really serious about my explosion lecture last time by basically quoting from the movie Ed Wood that we all need to end with a big explosion. But all these movies do actually use explosions to tie our attention to. And if you recall from the Gangs of New York, when I said I'd be talking about Battleship Potemkin, well, here it is. Here's what I'm talking about. Battleship Potemkin is where you use explosions to carry the attention. That the step sequence, I won't go over too much, except it uses more zigzag match on shape. And match on shape can be very mathematical with all of the sphere grids that we're using, not only then, but with all of the mathematics of deconstructing your own shot by shooting it according to the time grid of the amount of reel of footage times the amount your brain can take the length of a shot as compared to the next shot to make it look like the previous shot and that shot were connected by connecting them by even visual or thematic or just lengthwise cues. And that is how montage really works. If you put a splice here that's 4 seconds long, it may only match with a 3.8 second long, even if you're trying to get it the exact length, because the editing allows a certain lapse in between the jump from one shot to another, even though it looks perfectly seamless in a match on action, match on shape, or match on space. Sometimes match on time can make even a jump cut look natural, but most jump cuts are natural because they're just the same space with a little bit of time duration taken out of it. So it's more like a plot hack cut. You're taking out a jump cut is just the same scene, but like a few seconds later. They had a lot of those in Darling, the movie. They have some of those in Battleship Potemkin. I don't know why this cover's so grisly, but this is a good version. It's Image Entertainment. I got one of my Les Vampire movies from them. They're legit. They're silent films. Prokofiev probably did a score later for Ivan the Terrible, and obviously for Andrei Rublev. Not Andrei Rublev, but was it Nevsky? Alexander Nevsky? Sorry for that title split. Alexander Nevsky by Eisenstein is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. I've seen it so many times, I have it literally, we'll talk about it. But Alexander Nevsky does not even compete with the mathematical mind-bogglement of every scene I see of this connecting to the scene before. And yet it looks so quick and snappy. It looks like you're traveling through TV when nothing's on but the war room. And whether they're getting bad meat or not, they still could have gotten home in time to stop the debacle that took place on the steps because they're even traveling there. And why statues are exploding in every direction and why they're even aiming at the Opera House when most of the guys at the Opera House didn't even know they were coming home. And then it's all a victory for the big revolution means this is why the political side of it didn't make sense to me that much, because I'm like, dude, if a ship was running out of meat, we'd get it meat. And if there was a bunch of dudes getting shot up on the square, those dudes would fight back and probably win it over for the innocent people. And we wouldn't blow up our damn opera house. We'd probably go back and, I don't know, fight the ship that was coming to give us the maggoty meat in the first place, if that's how a civil war is. But I'm not just aiming to say we'd do it better. That's what's cool about the movie after all, is it was one of those we need to do this better as a country movies, and it wasn't ashamed to say, this is what we did wrong. Notice the anti-communist bluff. This is what we did wrong. This is what went wrong. That it's somewhat entertaining. Yeah, people like watching that. I mean, the Untouchables, when they do that whole step scene and they're saving the baby, yeah, they like those things and those elements of Battleship Potemkin and Gangs of New York and stuff. Don't get me wrong. But that the movie is unashamedly realistic in its portrayal of revolution in Russia is so catastrophic in a way that you can see why these events are kind of like a total wipeout. It's like Man with the Movie Camera is Ziga Verdov making this beautiful city, and we'll talk about it later, but it's like Battleship Potemkin crushes all that and says, no, it all went to heck, and whether it was before or after Vertov doesn't matter. It all went to heck because everything got destroyed after the strike. We can't get meat to our soldiers. All our men are dying, and all we can do is blow up an opera house. But you can also look at it like we are the revolutionary bourgeoisie is at the top. And we must show the bourgeoisie we still have power, even though the bourgeoisie has seized our power for so long. They've seized our power by killing our people. They've seized our power. So what represents the bourgeoisie? Well, not really the opera house, and that's where I got to disagree with why they got to blow up their own hoist just because they got hoisted. I mean, just turn yourselves in and go to the gallows. What are you going to do, man? But that they blew up the opera house is going to cost me one last trip to Russia where I'm not going to go to watch an opera anyway. If I needed to see it, I'd watch one on DVD or just get the Battleship Potemkin because it's pretty much like visually told, like a music that was added to it in the orchestra when it was silent could have totally ridden the fact that it was made for music to be watched with it. And speaking of made to be music watched with it, we still have a little bit of time on today's Masterclass. And we're going to go into an American film because we've been so ribalded by these foreign and everything. And we did have one key American film, Wizard of Oz. Now, this is going to really be tricky because I can't sing along with this because I can't reach the key, but this is what we're doing next. And I know some would skirt me for saying, why don't I have the box that goes on the outside? And it's not because I ditched those. But on this specific one, I think I was hiding weed in the box. And the box got too damaged to carry it anymore. So the fact that it stayed good in that state when the box got ruined meant the box did its job, but it devalues the copy a little bit in worth. But it's still a pretty valuable copy of what is put out. Now, one thing I've got to review about Wizard of Oz, pretty valuable copy, special edition, definitely DVD. This one, the complete Metropolis, very valuable. I'm not going to go into the exact price of that one, but that's the complete and the one with the hologram on the cover. This one is fairly valuable in the $30, $40 range nowadays because as I know about Image Entertainment, oftentimes even the masterpieces, as we've held these three to be, are in the out of print range sometimes. But I'm pretty sure you can find Wizard of Oz almost any time of year, any day, any time you want it. That there are better versions to be released with even footage that I saw get destroyed as the Patchwork Girl of Oz will continue. Singing in the Rain. Now, we've got to bring up Clockwork Orange real quick because they used this in the soundtrack at the end of Clockwork Orange. And remember, this came first. It was 1952. But what's weird about this movie that we've got to talk about is B-sides. Because if music came in Kubrick's way of saying, I can use cool music from the jazz era of the 50s in my Clockwork Orange movie 20 years later, it's totally investigating ultraviolence in these things. And then we're saying somehow psychology doesn't make him cheery, but at the same time, some of the worst scenes of Clockwork Orange happen with Singing in the Rain. But you got to understand what's real context about that isn't so much that Clockwork Orange copied it later, as did it quite a few other movies, not just ones that weren't using it in a worse way, like Clockwork Orange was, and copying Clockwork Orange's version of it. But you got to understand, the only reason I bring this up is because MGM, by 1928, when Jazz Singer came out in 1927, I mean, all these, and we'll talk about that later, but there's all these movies that are wiring for sound. And you've got to understand that there's this early movie on that's called Singing in the Rain, and it's for MGM, and it's not even this one, it's like from 1929, and it's this whole Ziegfeld Follies review. And if you remember, a lot of the vaudeville was also competing on 42nd Street with the Ziegfeld Follies of the musical era of Broadway and all the Broadway book musicals that were constantly going to these Follies review, where beautiful women would sing music and dance for a huge integrated audience of all these people in New York that came out to see them dance and sing. And in that, they found all the music for Singing in the Rain. Now that it's upgraded the music by a ton, because by then research had been done on sound film, discovered at Warner Brothers, and for the jazz singer, although elements of it had been used before. By the time they'd made the 1929 one, they'd found a wire so good they could record all their old songs. And they were already recording them by that time on to record. But by the time they reached the stage of theaters being in stereophonic sound, which means that there's stereos everywhere, the surround sound, that you get stereos for every medium of every sound, in every wavelength, in every direction, according to the frame where the sound is coming from in the sound around the time of Singing in the Rain. And that's because Singing in the Rain takes all the sound into consideration for the film. Now that they did on the Ziegfeld Follies hoist it a little bit canned, but not really. It's a pretty well-rounded sound. It's just the image, it needs to be brought up to audio quality. And that there's more jazzy, flowing melodies to the 1951s is because Gene Kelly worked with Stanley Donen, not only on the dancing and singing, and Gene Kelly was known as MGM's guy for dancing and singing, and so was, Donald O'Connor was a comedian, and he does a make 'em laugh number that's unforgettable. And then Debbie Reynolds is beautiful in the movie, and she's, part of the family in that. Judy Garland is married to Vincent Minnelli, but this is a Stanley Donen picture, and it's about MGM. And Debbie Reynolds being Carrie Fisher's mom's interesting. Gene Kelly, what a sensation he was. And Vincent Minnelli is the pirate. Gene Kelly is brilliant. And It's Always Fair Weather by Stanley Donen. Gene Kelly's amazing. And there's a lot of good Gene Kelly movies, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, we covered a little bit before in a previous episode. But I like the Minnelli movie with Kelly, Brigadoon. And I like the Stanley Donen movie with Kelly, Singing in the Rain. Because Singing in the Rain, to me, is the only other musical besides Meet Me in St. Louis that I know all the music to, and has totally pumped me up to sing along with both of them, and why they don't have their own sing-alongs. And Sound of Music is one of the best movies ever made too, and it has its own sing-along. But why Meet Me in St. Louis doesn't go on revival so everyone can see it? Because they need a wider market for Meet Me in St. Louis. We'll go over it later, but Singing in the Rain is more of the montage style, which is why I'm glad I brought up Eisenstein, because this actually cuts to the music and rhythm of the music and rhythm that you hear in the film, which is just a little more melodic than the Ziegfeld Follies, arguably maybe not, which is also a different kind of staccato jazz, and this is a more fluid movement of jazz. And we have songs telling each other how beautiful we are. Now, this one also covers how the silent film became the sound film from the jazz singer. That it does it in some flair that I'm not too happy about is okay, because it's funny. But you still get the sense that silent film is not necessarily without its love for audience and its audience love for it, but that they need to move on to sound is really what's overplayed in what we already knew to be true by the time all of us as a sophisticated post-World War II audience is going to watch this movie and this musical, knowing that, oh yeah, That's why they made sound films, was musicals. Well, it was, but then there were gangster films that wouldn't have been very good gangster films without their soundtrack, and westerns the same. And though there were silent gangster films and silent westerns, they were just as good as some of the sound ones, is true too. And that's just one of those unpredictable natures of putting a picture up next to another picture, and maybe it doesn't look like the same thing you saw before, but reminds you of something else the second time. So we'll pick up from here on our next masterclass. It'll probably go a little longer next time. Maybe we might reconvene tomorrow or the next day. We'll figure something out. Go smoke a joint and we'll meet again.